Yeah, but what
the
about my question?
Whether or not Hamas is genocidal in its intent, I disagree. And Emily's saying, look, Hamas is reacting. They're an armed resistance group trying to fight for their liberation. I'm not justifying anything that they've done. The United States also called Nelson Mandela and the ANC a terrorist organization. I think they're an armed resistance group trying to fight for the liberation of Palestine.
Khalid Mash'al was interviewed 2 weeks ago in a podcast. Okay? He was like sitting in one of the, prestigious hotels doing a podcast while his people are starving or, going through Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip. And he's being interviewed for a podcast and saying in that podcast, we're not talking about two-state solution. No. There's only one state, from the river to the sea, which means we're eliminating the state of Israel. So when Hamas is asking to stop the war, it's very funny. You are declaring to erase. You're saying the state of Israel is like, you're not going to just be okay with the Gaza Strip or the Palestinian territories. You're saying that you are going to be okay with all Israel. So when you're asking to stop the war in the same sentence, it's a little bit funny. And at the same time, another leader of Hamas they're basically laughing in the face of the international community. They're looking at these young people marching on the streets, shouting in the name of a terror organization, and they're laughing.
Palestinians do not appear in their humanity, in their individuality. And this is the basic recipe for dehumanization to turn into this bias that then doesn't recognize a crime, even if it's really televised on an everyday basis. The youth, though, they're different. This is my hope, that we are not all numb in our society.
Look, listen, I'm not going to give an obligatory condemnation of Hamas. What I will do is condemn the policies that precipitate violence. What I will do is condemn the roots of the violence, because inevitably you will have blowback when you deny millions of people basic human rights.
Why is Israel obliged to give the Palestinians basic human rights when no other regime in the Middle East gives their people basic human rights?
And Hamas is a terrorist organization, and it's very strange for young, progressive student politics to kind of support a fascist terrorist group, because, they're talking about free Palestine. And I have somebody who has argued for a Palestinian state for most of my life. Since the 1980s, probably. Right now, if there was a Palestinian state, it would be run by Hamas. And that would make it a Taliban-like state, and it would be a client state of Iran. And is that what the progressive movements of the Western left wish to create?
And Israel has to keep those people out so they don't become the popular consent that enforces the kind of government, Islamic government, or dictatorship, that you have to have when your people are that fixated on the idea of Sharia law, of that kind of, of that much of a jihadi mindset. You need either a dictatorship or a government that adheres to Sharia law so that the people feel that the system of life they think is moral is done. Sovereignty has to be earned. And we've granted far too many sovereignties to, populations that want that kind of life. I don't know what to do about the Palestinians, but as far as I'm concerned, they've been given their state, so they've been given sovereignty in Gaza, and we've seen what was done with it. It was a disaster.
when they're living under brutal medieval siege and barbaric military occupation, a fascist military occupation in the West Bank. Hamas doesn't govern the West Bank.
Now, Elon Jono did take this argument apart. He said he basically said that what happened, Israel's conquest is not what it's painted out to be. Israel had its partitioned land. It gained its partitioned land. It gained greater territory because it won much of the war for independence. It basically won the war. Then Gaza and the West Bank became occupied by Jordan and Egypt, respectively. Then in the 1967 war, Israel gained that territory back because those countries started the war. Israel gained the territory back. This line that Israel was a conquering power because it fought back and gained more territory in a war that the other side started is ridiculous.
I don't need to sit here and give a condemnation of Hamas. I can explain why Hamas exists. I don't have to support what they did. I don't have to justify or rationalize it.
It chills me the way she just burst into laughter at the idea. That's chilling. That is something sick about that, frankly. Demonic. I actually struggled to sleep after watching this interview, I'm going to admit. I did.
Emily, you're doing the exact same thing and you're projecting it on me. Okay, so do you condemn the actions of Israel for killing 13,000 children?
I don't accept that 13,000 children have been killed.
I condemn Hamas for starting a war that led to the deaths of 13,000 children. Strongly, unequivocally, I condemn Hamas for that.
But it depends on the context of what's happening. Do I condemn certain actions of the state of Israel?
Palestinians their reality.
You're denying Palestinians the reality of what so many of these warped terrorists actually are. Okay? You're infantilizing them.
Do I think Israel is always right?
You're denying Palestinians their reality. This is why Palestinians have to show their dead kids on camera.
The dead kids on camera, Abby, because Hamas has badly managed their state and persists on keep getting them into unwinnable wars with Israel, while making no provisions for their safety at all.
Do I think Israel is always right?
You're denying Palestinians their reality. This is why Palestinians have to show their dead kids on camera.
You notice she makes a bit of a concession. Abby is relentless. She can't be appeased. People like that have to be fought. Can't be appeased. They can't be reasoned with.
Okay, Abby, what would you say Hamas have done wrong?
I'm not going to sit up here. I don't even know really what happened.
Oh, for God's sake. I mean, even for going just what a disgraceful denialism you're going to put out there. The idea that you're going to just admit, oh, I'm ill prepared for this debate. I don't have a clue what happened, but I'm going to see myself fit to lecture Israel on how it should respond to something that I don't even have a clue about. But I'm going to tell them they have no right to retaliate the way they're doing to something I don't even know the details of. It's just insane. Those generals that you're trying to, tell your lecture, they know more about what happened than you do. You have admitted they know more about what happened than you do. And they care about what happened more than you do.
Can't find anything.
How hard is it to condemn rape?
You can't find anything to say they did that was wrong?
All of the lies that have been perpetrated. Look, Hamas killing civilians, I'm sure atrocities were committed on both sides. On October 7th, I'm
on
sure
October 7th, atrocities were committed.
I don't know.
What atrocities did Israel commit on October 7th?
Oh, for God's sake. She's trying to both sides October the 7th when Hamas invaded Israel and I assume the IDF enacted countermeasures to repel them. And she's trying to make that a both sides thing. Well, Hamas killed people and then the Israeli army, the IDF mobilized to kill the Hamas members. It was a both sides kind of thing. It's like, that is kind of the epitome of this warped culture of, moral, this obsession, deranged obsession with trying to feign this kind of bullshit moral equivalence between the West and its enemies, or Israel and its enemies, and trying to make out that, well, we'll see, the IDF trying to repel an invasion force of Hamas terrorist savages who've been butchering on innocent people, their aggression in terms of, which is necessary to repel them, is just as bad as the terrorists invading Israel. It's just absurd. It's like, these criminals go on a crime spree and the cops, take, violent action to stop them. And it's like, oh, that's both sides are doing it. Both sides are being aggressive here. The police are being just as aggressive as the criminals. It is the most, it's retarded. It's infantile. And it's just, it should not be even remotely entertained. Both sides on October the 7th. That's just, Abby's making a fool of herself here. An absolute fool of herself. It's like, this is just the epitome of this nonsense idea of, false equivalence between Hamas, who invaded Israel on October the 7th, and the IDF, who fought a waging battle to drive Hamas out, to stop them from advancing into Israeli society, to kill more Israeli citizens. The IDF protecting its people from Hamas murderers is they're showing aggression. It's a both sides thing because they're both using violence. It's the most pathetic, warped thing. But it's obvious what she's actually getting at really here, which is,
can't stop talking.
Let Abby speak.
There's so many lies that were put out by Israeli authorities that it's really hard to parse through. Look, we don't know how many civilians were killed in the crossfire by Israeli soldiers enlisting the Hannibal Directive. So, look, the mass rape, the beheaded babies, the ripping the babies out of pregnant women's stomachs. All of these things are such egregious lies.
Okay, but what she's getting at is that she obviously believes in the Hannibal Directive. She obviously believes the Hannibal Directive was enacted that day. But even then, look, okay, the Hannibal Directive. Does Israel have a Hannibal Directive? And was it used on October the 7th?
There's not been beheadings of babies and rapings. Israel murdered their own people on October 7th.
Calling Hamas a terrorist organization is ridiculous, racist, and plays into genocidal propaganda that is flooding our media and that we should be doing everything possible to combat.
I support the right of Palestinians to resist occupation, including through Hamas, the armed wing of the unified Palestinian resistance.
As an Arab, asking with this context to condemn Hamas is very anti-Arab racist.
The notion that this was a massacre of Jews is a fabricated narrative. Many of those killed on October 7th,
Thank you, ma'am. Your time is up.
Including children, were killed by the IDF. An amendment condemning Hamas is bald propaganda meant to...
Thank you. Your time is up.
She's going for this Hannibal Directive theory that her old friend Max Blumenthal put out. He was quick to put it out, this theory that most of the deaths happened by the IDF. Yeah, the IDF enacted the Hannibal Directive to prevent Hamas gaining hostages. They were on orders to just, show no distinction between Hamas and hostages and just, open fire. Just to destroy Hamas. And now, do I believe that? A lot of people on the left believe it. I've frankly made a policy of not entertaining it at all, because I know the warped agenda of people who have spewed the theory. It's like if it's not true, they want it true. And from what I know, like the first one who shared the evidence of it was that really creepy Syrian girl. I remember from back in the days being this kind of Alex Jones wannabe who kind of would go on and she'd kind of just spewing conspiracy nonsense. Like, I always knew she was fishy, and she's been particularly nasty in this. She practically wets her panties for fucking Hamas terrorist scumbags. It's sick. She's warped. Almost as warped as Abby. But she was the first to share this theory, and she showed this infrared helicopter camera footage of what was being billed as this is October the 7th. This is the Israeli military killing their own citizens to stop them being captured by Hamas. And there were quite a few people in the comments saying, no, this footage is from years ago, and it's got nothing to. This was from Syria, or something, but it had nothing to do with Gaza or Israel, and it was from years ago. So I know that there are people who will lie in any way possible, tell any lie to try and make Hamas look innocent on that day, and pretend that they didn't commit the worst massacres. I mean, to me, it's immaterial. If the IDF did implement the thing is, the Hannibal Directive, as far as I know, the Hannibal Directive it only applies to military personnel. It's to stop military personnel from being abducted by Hamas, because usually that's as far as Hamas are able to get. They're only able to get to one of the checkpoints. If they want to take a hostage, they can only get as far as a checkpoint and maybe abduct a soldier. And the Hannibal Directive is to stop that soldier becoming a hostage. And it's within the military doctrine of, look, if you're serving in the military, your life's on the line, you swear your oath to the country. That means, as a result, you accept that if you are captured by the enemy, we may have to kill you to prevent you becoming a captive of Hamas. It's only supposed to apply to soldiers. It was never supposed to apply to civilians, and I believe it was supposed to have been redacted as a directive in 2017 or something. I just cannot believe Abbey was so ill prepared for this. It's ridiculous. I don't think it's ever officially been the case that the Hannibal Directive is ever to be used on civilians. I don't think it's ever been used on civilians, or at least it's not officially. It's not supposed to be ever used on civilians. But and the fact is, if you're dealing with a terrorist entity for long enough, then yes, the Hannibal Directive does become something like the Hannibal Directive does become deemed necessary. Like Russia had something like the Hannibal Directive. Even before 9/11, Russia was dealing with Islamic terrorism in a massive like the kind of Islamic extremism Russia was dealing with in the 90s was just off the charts. It was ridiculous. It was insane. And Russia did adopt a policy that was very much like the Hannibal Directive. The policy, but it was actually literally closer to what Max Blumenthal says, where civilian collateral is. It's civilians are considered your own civilians are considered an acceptable target. They're considered an acceptable target, which means if a plane hijacking happened in Russia in the late 90s, even before 9/11, if a plane was hijacked and the terrorists were holding the passengers hostage and they were saying, these are our demands, the Russian policy would be to just blow up the plane and say, we don't care about whether we save the hostages or not, at least we killed the terrorist. And that was the message you had to send to these terrorists of, we don't care who you hold hostage, we will just kill you. And it was meant to disincentivize hijackings. And that's what you had to do after a while. And in fact, 9/11 kind of changed the game for America to the point where if a 9/11 happened again, then it would be deemed necessary to shoot the plane down, rather than trying to rescue it's just to assume the hostages on the plane are as good as dead. You've just got to make sure that plane is never used as a weapon by the jihadists, so shoot it down. Don't let another 9/11 happen. That would be probably the most likely policy after 9/11. I don't believe. Do I believe the Hannibal Directive was enforced? It seems to me, even if it was incidental to the amount of hostages that Hamas were able to capture. I mean, Hamas managed to capture 230 hostages. If the Hannibal Directive was enacted, it didn't do much good. We can see from all the footage what Hamas did, how many they slaughtered. The idea that you'd have to even concoct a conspiracy theory about the majority of deaths being caused by another party is it's an attempt to deflect from what Hamas did. It's a sinister, creepy, despicable attempt to deflect from what Hamas did. but it's what Abby goes with.
I mean, we don't know how many civilians were killed in the crossfire by Israeli soldiers enlisting the Hannibal Directive.
So you have no right to say that Israel is wrong to retaliate the way it has, because you don't know what they're retaliating to. You don't know what happened. Just callousness towards the victims who were killed that day, which is grotesquely ironic, because most of the victims killed that day in the kibbutz and in the Nova Festival would probably have been very, very in line with Abby's politics. But it didn't matter. They were Israeli, and so Abby hates them. She really hates them with a psychotic derangement.
So many lies that were put out by Israeli authorities that it's really hard to parse through. Look.
So many lies put out by your brethren on the left as well, like that creep Max Blumenthal you pal around with, Abby. So many lies by your side, really, that's the thing. I mean, even Hamas have not denied the rapes they committed. Even Hamas have not claimed that, the Hannibal Directive killed many of the hostages they were trying to take. So why the hell are you being a voice, being the kind of the mouthpiece for Hamas to make Hamas sound less awful than they actually are? That's the weirdest scandal of all.
Okay. That I really just can't sit up here and condemn things that I don't even know what happened.
What about the atrocities which Hamas recorded and filmed themselves and then posted to the world to brazenly boast about what they were doing? What about that?
Look, nothing that Hamas did on October 7th compares to what Israel has done in response.
No, I'm asking you a direct question.
October 7th. And looking at Hannibal Directive. So, look, there's the
even if it's true that the Hannibal Directive was enacted, it was enacted because Hamas committed a massacre in Israeli society. The IDF was doing what was necessary to make sure that terrorist group was eliminated on Israeli soil before they could move any further into Israeli territory. The point was to kill terrorists who were invading, which is what you have to do to protect the country. And Abby wants to make that it's a both sides thing of, the IDF were just as wrong as Hamas were, or something.
First of all, I'm not denying. I'm saying that we don't have the evidence yet of what the numbers are, and we don't know what the breakdown is.
How many do you think it is then?
We don't know yet.
Well, we
but
do,
you also have to remember the fact that what Israel is
as
targeting...
I said to you, Emily, the Palestinian Health Authority numbers historically have turned out to be proven to be pretty accurate.
The Palestinian Authority, the Ministry of Health has been instructed explicitly by Hamas not to report combatants.
That's not my point.
The numbers are not accurate and they cannot be trusted.
As I've just said to you, historically, if you go and check historically, the Palestinian Health Authority, run by Hamas, their numbers have turned out to be broadly accurate.
God, that look on her eye just gives me nightmares. It's like I'm looking to the pits of hell. I actually struggle to sleep at night after watching this first time.
So, look, the mass rape, the beheaded babies, the ripping the babies out of pregnant women's stomachs. I mean, all of these things are such egregious lies.
How dare you say they're egregious lies? You don't have a clue. How dare you defend Hamas and say they're just being lied about. They didn't do these savage things. I've seen videos of what Hamas did. Now, I haven't seen the worst of it. I refuse to watch the worst of it on principle, but I've seen enough. I do not even think it out of character for Hamas to do these things.
Okay. That I really just can't sit up here and condemn things that I don't even know what happened.
What about the
If you can't condemn things you don't know what happened or not, why do you condemn the retaliation when you don't know whether it was warranted or not, based on how Israel was attacked?
What happened?
What about the atrocities which Hamas recorded and filmed themselves and then posted to the world to brazenly boast about what they were doing?
Good point, Piers.
What about that?
Look, nothing that Hamas did on October 7th compares to what Israel has done in response.
No, you claim you don't even know what Hamas did on October the 7th. And what Hamas did on October the 7th is directly responsible for how Israel has had to respond. Israel cannot not retaliate to that. It can't tolerate an enemy at its doorstep that is prepared to do that to its own citizens. It has to protect its own citizens. But you seem to think it's racist for the Israeli army to place their own citizens first. That's just your distorted, warped worldview. And it's the kind of... I think you know that's bullshit, but you're playing to a cult audience you can rabble-rouse into building this picture of a racist America and a racist Israel.
And a direct question about the fact that they boasted about the mass murder they were committing.
Just make it all about October 7th.
Hamas make it all about October the 7th. They brag that they'll do it again and again, which forces Israel to carry on bombing Gaza until Hamas are in no capacity to do October the 7th again and again, like they have threatened to do and promised to do, you stupid woman.
And that's what I'm saying. It all pales in comparison, Pierce.
But if you can't condemn anything Hamas has done,
that happened, I already said.
You haven't condemned them.
Killing civilians is wrong.
What Hamas did was not just wrong, it was evil. Okay, why was it so difficult to dig that out of you? Why wasn't it just second nature for you to condemn what Hamas did?
So what
Killing
they did,
civilians is wrong.
So what Hamas did on October 7th was wrong.
What does that make what Israel has done?
Hang on, I'm trying to...
It's forced Israel to respond to unprecedented savagery with ruthless violence. It has to send the message that that kind of savagery will never be tolerated again. That's all you have to do to protect your citizens from savages who do not respect your laws of civility.
You haven't condemned them.
Killing civilians is wrong.
So what
Killing
they did,
civilians is wrong.
So what Hamas did on October 7th was wrong.
What does that make what Israel has done?
Hang on, I'm trying to unpick your argument. So if it's wrong to kill civilians, were Hamas wrong to do what they did on October the 7th, given how many civilians were brutally murdered?
Are you doing the same thing to Emily? And if not,
just asking,
why?
do you think it was wrong?
Why are you not sitting her?
Do you think it was wrong?
Is it wrong to kill 13,000
Why
children?
can't you answer a simple question?
Is it wrong to kill 100? I already said it. Pierce.
It's like, General Dallaire said at the beginning of Shake Hands with the Devil, war has a terrible momentum. It overrides all attempts by human diplomacy to stop it. Hamas made sure that it was impossible for diplomacy to stop it. What they did was so savage, and how they bragged about it was so sadistic, that there was no way there could be peace until Hamas were gotten rid of. And I don't know how much closer that... I mean, will it get us closer to peace? I don't know. No. Will the problem be over once Hamas is defeated? Probably not. But it will at least have removed one of the biggest obstacles to peace. For good. There's barely a hope of peace now. Removing Hamas at least gets us an inch closer to the possibility of peace. The possibility of reform of Palestinian society. And the Middle East, the message sent that, there is no winning a war the way Hamas has waged it. And that's what that's the message Israel is trying to send and has to send to prevent further atrocities like October the 7th. And you want to stick the knife into Israel and condemn them for doing what has to be done to send that message. You want to make sure that Israel can't send that message. So you want to make sure that all the deaths so far have been pointless.
I'm trying to unpick your argument. So if it's wrong to kill civilians, were Hamas wrong to do what they did on October the 7th, given how many civilians were brutally murdered?
Are you doing the same thing to Emily? And if not,
just asking,
why?
Do you think it was wrong?
Why are you not sitting her?
Do you think it was wrong?
Is it wrong to kill 13,000
Why
children?
can't you answer a simple question?
Is it wrong to kill 100? I already said it. Pierce.
Was it wrong?
I'm not going to sit here. You're basically comparing Hamas to Israel.
No, I'm not comparing anything. You
really
said just now,
yes,
unless I'm mistaken, you just said to me that the killing of innocent civilians is wrong. I then asked you, fairly self-evidently, I think, the question, that in that case, given that Hamas showed us on tape them killing civilians, innocent civilians, on October the 7th, Do you accept that was wrong? Yes or no?
You saw the tape?
Yeah, they showed us.
You saw the tape of them killing innocent civilians?
Yes, they
Why is she so kind of cold to that? Cold and stony to that. It's just psychopath.
literally broadcast it to the world. Yes, we all did.
Here's what I saw. I saw pictures on October 7th. I was on holiday at the time, and I saw this picture of it was 3 or 4 old age pensioners waiting at a bus stop who'd been gunned down at the bus stop. They'd just been gunned down, cold blood, unarmed, just massacred. That was a picture. I saw some of the images as well. I saw some video clips as well. I saw one Hamas militant going in and into someone's house and basically just shot someone in the back of the head. I saw them shoot someone's dog at the front porch. There was someone running along to greet the terrorist, and the mass terrorist just shot the dog dead. Was that dog part of the occupation, Abby? Had that dog benefited from the Nakba and had to be punished for benefiting from the Nakba? Why did that dog have to die? Was it a blowback response to Israel's foreign policy? Because I didn't see any helicopters enacting the Hannibal Directive on that dog. The worst things I saw was the raid on the Nova Festival. I actually saw them actually shooting into toilet cubicles. You know, anyone in that toilet cubicle was killed instantly. No escape. It was just, and then there was, eventually one day I did actually watch the most shocking video of all, which was the beheading of a Thai worker, with a shovel. And they're toying with the body of a Thai worker, and one militant was accusing the other one of being savage. They might have been Hamas militant. They might have been one of the, if you can believe this, one of the even worse jihadi group, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who were even worse than Hamas. Or they might have been Fatah, or they might have been just regular brainwashed members of the population who've been taught in other schools that their highest duty is to kill Jews. And they just decided to come along with Hamas and join in the savagery. And they were hacking away at this guy's body, and eventually the guy went Allah Akbar and drove the shovel down on him. And I turned away, tried my best to turn away and not see at the moment that the head became disconnected from the body. What kind of people are these? There is hellspawn in Gaza, and it has to be rooted out.
And then more horror images start to come in. Horror images of Israeli soldiers being dragged into bodies, being dragged into the Gaza Strip, spat on. Really being like, people are attacking the bodies of these soldiers. And I was like, I watched these images because everything is on social media. I remember that I said to Tahi, oh my God, his mom is watching. That was the first sentence that came out of my mouth. And I started crying. Oh my God, his mom is watching this. She doesn't know she's watching her child being murdered in front of her eyes. And as I was saying the sentence, Tahi got in, and when he went out, he was on his uniform.
Meaning as you were watching this, he went into the bedroom, he put on his uniform, and he came out.
Yeah, and he's like standing on like the balcony's door, and I told him, where do you think you're going? He told me, I have to go out. This is not a drill. And I told him, I'm alone here with like, what am I supposed to do? He told me, close the door, get into the safe room, and every time that you will hear a siren, just do whatever you need to do. I need to go out.
So I've not seen the worst of it. I've not seen the rapes. I've not seen the murders. What I've seen is horrific enough, and what I've seen certainly leaves me no doubt that everything else that it's reported that Hamas did was completely in character for those evil savages who the world seems to have somehow become obsessed with treating as a noble resistance somehow. It's perverse.
You saw the tape?
Yeah, they showed us.
You saw the tape of them killing innocent civilians?
Yes, they literally broadcast it to the world. Yes, we all did.
And so do Israeli soldiers.
Fine,
in a
why can't you
fashion.
forget
it's
Israel
like
for
watching,
a moment?
It's like watching.
Forget Israel for a moment.
It's like watching Nazis.
If it's wrong to kill innocent civilians,
II
Abby,
on social media.
If it's wrong to kill innocent civilians, I'll ask you one more time. You haven't got to answer. Up to you.
What the bloody hell is she on about? It's like watching Nazis. Where did she get that from? I mean, I could maybe understand comparing the Alexandroni Brigade who did the Tantora massacre as being Nazi-like. That thought crossed my mind when I watched what they were doing when I watched the documentary about what happened in Tantora. The massacres, the cold-bloodedness, it felt very Nazi-like. It gave me the impression of a platoon behaving like Nazis.
שאספנו את התושבים, התחלקנו לחוליות, ונכנסנו לחצרות, בכל חצר היה 50 איש, 40 איש. 50, 40? כן, בתוכם חצרות, אבל הם פחדו, לבד הם לא יכולו, אז התקבצו בתוך חצרות כאלה. ונשק לא היה להם? לא, אלה תושבים כאילו, אלה תושבים. אז בואו נרשום רק את הפרטים, ריזק אשמאווי, אתה יליד טנטורה. התחילו לאסוף את האנשים כבר כמעט מ-10 ו-11 התחילו לאסוף את האנשים. התחילו הבחורים בצד והבחורות עם הילדים בצד. מההתחלה בחורים לחוד ובחורות לחוד. אבל זה באותו מקום, יעני, כולם רואים את כולם? כן. באיזה מקום זה היה? היה בדיוק על הצד הים.
The IDF today, the ones who take a lot of shit in the West Bank from kids throwing stones at them. Like these IDF who were being goaded on to shoot this little kid and by the kid's twisted, deranged, insane father. I mean, I think the IDF should have shot in this situation. I don't mean they should have shot the kid. They should have shot the father just to protect the kid from this nightmare creature of a daddy. Just what? Why does she think? I mean, is it just that it's been whispered in her ear enough by her echo chamber of these are Nazis? You know, let's go for the really nasty comparison of Jews and Nazis, and because it hurts. Like, I've seen that meme so often. It's like, don't you IDF soldiers realize you're becoming the Nazis? Don't you look in the mirror and see yourself oppressing the Palestinians in the West Bank? And don't you see the Nazis oppressing you 75 years ago? Don't you ever kind of, like there's that meme of, and at first I tried to be charitable to this meme, this meme where, showing an IDF soldier pointing a gun, restraining a Palestinian kid or a Palestinian mother, terrifying her, and him looking into this kind of broken window on the other side in the ruins of Gaza or the West Bank and seeing a reflection, and in that seeing a Nazi oppressing a Jewish person from 45 years ago in black and white. And it's almost like sending this message of, don't you see you're becoming the very thing you hate? And at first I thought it was meant to be a kind of a hearts and mind thing of appealing to their humanity, appealing to, it was presented as appealing to their humanity, and saying, look, don't become what you hated. Don't become the people who massacred you. But it snowballed from there. If it was ever, that was my charitable interpretation of what that was meant to me. But now I'm at the point where I just think, no, it's a deliberate taunt. It's a deliberate. We know it hurts you, so we're going to do it all the more because we hate you. We hate you so much that we gloated over the massacre of your people on October the 7th. We're not really interested in persuading you away from war. We are actually interested in cheering on the people, cheering on Hamas who are trying to kill you. But we're going to call you Nazis because we know it hurts as well. We want to stick the knife in.
And so do Israeli soldiers.
Fine.
In a
Why can't you
fashion.
forget
it's
Israel
like
for
watching,
a moment?
It's like watching.
Forget Israel for a moment.
It's like watching Nazis.
If it's wrong to kill innocent civilians.
I mean, it's just. The problem is this. Any army, rigid, regimented, can look like Nazis. But the only armies in modern times that you can actually compare to Nazis in terms of their evil fascist ideology are ISIS and Hamas. And neither of them act like a Nazi type army. They're very lousy. They're very, they louch about. They're very adolescent. There isn't that kind of stern discipline of them as a marching unit. They give in to their base instincts, their savagery, their adolescent kind of petulance. They're very relaxed, oddly, until they get fanatic. It's this kind of, so they don't present as Nazi, even though they absolutely are Nazis.
SS battalions who spent their days shooting Jews in the back of the head and pushing them into trenches had to get very, very drunk in the evening to forget what they had done. The Nazi high command famously had to sort of get around the problem of soldier morale because the soldiers knew this wasn't exactly what their lives were meant to look like either. I tell you one very big difference. If you look at the footage, the raw footage, and I really hope people don't on a wider scale have to view what I viewed the other day, if they see it, they will see something that is at least as barbaric as what the Nazis did. But here's the difference. They did it with glee. They were deeply proud. You see people trying to, taking the head off a young Israeli man with a shovel and then calling their parents back in Gaza and telling them, Father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. Get mother on the phone. I want to tell her how great a job her son has done. I come back to this thing. I'm not exaggerating this. It's very, very interesting, and people need to realize you had this situation with the Nazis where they also were a genocidal anti-Semitic organization, but they tried to cover their crimes up. Hamas are actually proud of them, and they've said they will do them until the whole world is clear of Jews.
Yeah.
So I suggest we take that seriously, and I think that Israel is taking it seriously. I hope they continue to take it seriously, but I think the world should take it seriously, and that includes Britain. And when I hear British journalists, British commentators, and British politicians lecturing the Israelis on what they should do, I think, I'm sorry, this shows a failing in our country. It shows that we in Britain cannot enforce our laws. We don't even enforce our borders in Britain. It's us that is the weak link in the international security chain on this, not Israel.
That is why they are being treated now as reasonably accurate numbers. There can be no doubt from the footage we've seen from the hospitals of endless children, from the bomb sites, endless children being killed, that there are thousands of children being killed. To try and deny that, to try and...
I'm not denying that children are being killed. I'm not denying that
you
there
don't
have
believe
been
the
many
numbers.
casualties.
And you're trying to
saying
avoid...
we don't know the numbers yet.
Right.
And we cannot state definitively, especially if the source is Hamas, that 13,000 children have been killed.
You have actually no idea that 9,000 Hamas terrorists have been killed.
According to IDF intelligence, yeah, we do.
So you believe IDF intelligence, but you won't believe
A
the other
terrorist
side's numbers on
organization?
victims.
Absolutely. I would believe the IDF over a US and UK designated
Even if
organization that has been proven to lie about this.
Even if other independent agencies have corroborated the Palestinian Health Authority numbers, you still
What
won't believe them.
independent agencies? The United Nations?
Yeah.
This is not independent, as has been proven by this war itself.
And other
Members
aid
of UNRWA are
agencies.
actually active terrorists. Some of them took part in the October 7th massacre.
Right, so here's my problem with this
There's
debate.
no evidence for
Here's
that.
my problem with the debate for both of you. There is a level of denial on both sides, which I think people in the middle who don't have a horse in the race, right, who are looking at this from afar, they're aghast at the level of self-denial. And we talk about how this all plays out at the end. How does this end, Abby? I mean, how do you actually get peace when we can't even have a debate without people screaming at each other? But we now know that a lot of Gaza has been leveled. I don't know if they can go back and live there, Gazans. I don't know how many more are going to get killed if Israel attacks the Rafah refugee camp in his efforts to finish off Hamas. I don't know these answers. What I do know is I find it very, very implausible that at the end of this, it simply all gets sorted out quite quickly and the Gazans go back to their destroyed homes, it all gets rebuilt, and they'll live happily ever after. So how does it end?
Right. I mean, well, no construction material has been allowed in for quite some time, so there is no rebuilding effort that's possible, especially when you've decimated the entire strip, demolished every aspect of civilian life, surgically striking doctors alongside their entire families, killing over 100 journalists, many in targeted assassinations alongside their entire families. I mean, really the best and brightest in Palestinian society in Gaza has been destroyed. IDF soldiers posting on TikTok that they're just blowing up mosques because they're bored, looting and pillaging women's lingerie. I mean, it really is depraved levels of sadism going on here.
This whole thing about, complaining about the IDF, she says it's like watching Nazis, and then she says they're dressing in women's lingerie from Palestinian women's lingerie. I mean, I don't feel the need to get outraged about it because, the people who are getting outraged about it seem to have nothing to say about the more depraved, horrific things that Hamas did to the Israeli women that they raped, mutilated, and murdered on October the 7th. And that those leftists threw under the bus completely in real time. There's just no comparison, and it's disturbing that Abby still assumes the authority to pearl clutch about it. It's like she's got no self-awareness. None of these protesters do, but they think because they're on the right side of history, because they've been told that these people are Nazis, and what the bloody hell does, horse playing around in, Palestinian women's lingerie have to do with being Nazis? That's just being, horseplay between men. And, after what happened to them, I don't really see much need to spoil their fun. I don't know what happened to the Palestinian women at the homes they raided, but, it's like, I've seen far worse things done in war, okay? I don't see the need to get outraged over that. It's pathetic, really. And moreover, this is the bottom line. When Abby will not even set a red line over rape, why the hell should we take her seriously when she says her red line is raiding, Palestinian women's lingerie and parading about it and having a laugh? That she's just so... It's again the whole, she just despises people having fun. She despises soldiers having fun in this grim time. It's like, you should be as miserable as I am. You should be as guilt-ridden as I am. You're evil if you're not riddled by guilt. This nasty, vindictive, evil, wicked stepmother thing about her.
I think it's wrong to kill innocent civilians.
So what Hamas did was wrong?
She's not going to answer.
Well, let her answer if she wants to. Last time, I'm going to ask it. So
I already told you I'm not going to sit here and condemn what Hamas did.
Right.
I understand why, and I don't have to agree with what Hamas did, right? To understand why
that wasn't my question. I just asked you.
Why?
I cannot even begin to understand what Hamas did, and I have watched documentaries on the occupation and the history that I thought made me understand Palestinian grievance, Palestinian rage, why Palestinians might have voted for Hamas and might have seen promise in Hamas of a fight back against what they saw as a very cowed existence under martial law. And I thought I understood it. I've tried to understand it. Nothing has got me any closer to understanding the sheer savagery, the sheer evil that was done on October the 7th. That's just a demonic ideology.
Whether
to understand why violence erupts.
Why do you not understand why violence by the Israeli side has happened? Why is there no understanding of that? Understanding of, that what Israel is doing is blow back to what Hamas did in its horrific October the 7th atrocities. But no, she'll never be understanding because all she has for Israel is sheer hate.
How does it end? A negotiated settlement immediately. I think that what Hamas is offering is not beyond the pale. It would be easy for Israel to comply with the demands.
Oh, you know what? I'm not going to entertain that. Oh, yeah, that's what I meant to say. The women's lingerie thing. What's that got to do with Nazism? How the hell does she figure that that's what Nazis do? Israel destroying, Israel is fighting a noble fight against Hamas terrorists. Okay, they're the heroes in this as far as I'm concerned. This joke about Nazis, it's ridiculous. It doesn't fit for a minute. It doesn't make sense. It's just a snarl word that she's learned off the left, and she's using it with vindictive intent, and you can see that pretty much everything she says in this has a vindictive character to it. She is vindictive throughout this whole thing. Vindictive is just second nature to her now. And that's what I mean. It's like I feel like Abby has gotten worse over the years. It's almost like since she got her hair dyed, to do a new look kind of thing, that it's like she's become more rotten with age. Why did I watch it? I wanted to see the arguments hashed out, I guess. I guess I wanted to see Abby's worldview, which I used to be somewhat susceptible to, properly debunked, properly challenged, probably, aired out, get to the heart of the issue, something. Or maybe I was just curious how she would perform in that interview. Almost like watching an old episode of the Empire Files again, only on a current affair. But this time with her being properly challenged. Maybe I thought there'd be something might come from that. But I watched it and obviously I was horrified. Okay. But as you can see, this is grotesque. And I got blocked again by my new account. Let's see. It's time to go through some tweets. There you see, I'm blocked because of how I responded to this interview. And I had to respond. I felt like I had to. I was just so sickened and furious. And I basically lost my composure. I've lost my composure a bit in this video, which I try not to do. Let's see. She had posted this on Piers Morgan. She had posted this on her Twitter account. She said, I make the case for how Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and why they must be stopped immediately on my debate with Piers Morgan. I said in reply, very furiously, I had to say this. I said, you make the case for what a demonic rape apologist you are, Abby. You are disgusting, evil, twisted woman. As you can see, that got me blocked. I said it because I was just so horrified by how vindictive she was. Just the hate, the loathsomeness, the contempt for the victims of October the 7th, the way she laughed, it haunted me. It literally haunted me. And I wasn't the only one haunted, and I wasn't the only one horrified. And Alfred Solomons replied and said, a longer piece, which basically said it better than I could. My post was just inarticulate rage. I'm glad it was seen. She blocked me because she saw my post, and I'm glad it got seen. I'm glad she knew just how disgusted I was, and how disgusting she'd been in that. And he said, you comprehensively tore apart her argument. He said, you steadfastly refused to condemn the actions of Hamas on October the 7th, which means, 1, you're tolerant of the killing of innocent civilians. 2, rape is also on your threshold of acceptable behaviour as long as you are in principal agreement with the aims of the perpetrator. Scumbag. You say that you disagree with the deliberate targeting of Israeli civilians, but absolutely refuse to oblige the host of the debate with a condemnation of Hamas for doing so, whilst simultaneously excoriating Israel for the incidental death of Arab civilians. You claim to disavow rape as a means of resistance, yet smirk at any evidence that this is what Hamas has done, simultaneously expressing refusal to condemn Hamas even if they had. Do you know that you're a scumbag, that you're among the lowest forms of life on this planet? And he said finally, I think I liked you better back in the days when you were just another TV-smashing 9/11 conspiracy kook. At least back then you were harmless. Now you're essentially advocating for the rape and murder of Jewish people, which renders you as a person about which something ought to be done. And I added in solidarity. I replied in solidarity. Same here. I used to like her Empire Files series when I first discovered it. I came to like her a bit less as I noticed her playing kooky takes. Since October the 7th, though, I have been disgusted by her denialist takes and lost all respect for her. She was positively demonic in this interview. And he said, this debate has removed all doubt as to Abby's hatred of Jewish people. There can no longer be any plausible denial along these lines. The mask has now slipped off completely. And it's true. Most of Abby's videos, in principle, did seem to show, vile regimes like America. They seem to have this demonic view of the American regime, the Saudi regime. It was plausible each time, and in fact, it was kind of made more or less explicit each time that her contempt for the regime, contempt for America, contempt for Saudi Arabia, did not extend to a contempt for the people that were under that government. Didn't. She believed the people under those regimes were victims, or the people under those regimes were fellow comrades. They could be fellow comrades. When it comes to Israel, no such charity. She sees Israelis as the problem. She sees the value that the Israeli regime places on its own citizens' life as the problem. And so she is seemingly gleeful or callous to the prospect of Israelis being killed or raped by Hamas terrorists, even if they're innocent, leftist commune building, old hippies in a kibbutz. Abby just thinks they have no right to be that well off.
Yes, absolutely. It was
right.
Back.
But was it wrong?
100%.
Was it wrong?
Look, I don't know how much you want to just go around the mulberry bush like this.
I think it's a fairly straightforward question. I don't see how anyone can come on a show like this.
Israel is doing
how can you take part in a debate like this and say killing innocent civilians is wrong, but I'm not going to tell you what Hamas did on October the 7th was wrong? It makes no sense, Abby. No sense.
I'm not going to sit here and condemn Hamas. I'm not going to do the obligatory ritual.
I hear you.
Ritual that everyone is browbeaten into doing. I'm just not going to do it, Piers. What Israel is doing right now is...
Which is really the problem. It's the core issue. Recently, I read a book by Jake Wallace-Simons called Israelophobia. It's an interesting book. It kind of tries to make the counter case against the way that Israel is disproportionately criticized, disproportionately hated by the left, by the Islamo left alliance, and by the media. This is a comment under one of the videos Spag Magazine will do sometimes of these podcasts, and it did a podcast discussion with Jake Wallace-Simons for his new book Israelophobia, which actually came out before October the 7th, but it had come out at a time when there'd been this shocking scene in London of a kind of rally for Palestine, these cars of Muslim Islamist lunatics with their megaphones, with the Palestinian flags, yelling, kill the Jews, rape their daughters. Literally said that on camera, and there was this horrific kind of, this was before October the 7th, and it's like, why was there no, like it was presented to the police and yet no one was arrested because apparently it wasn't evidence enough. Because our police are a joke. Now, the book was kind of a comment on how we got to that terrible stage and to try and argue somewhat for a certain soberness in, more sober proportionality, if you know what I mean, in terms of how Israel should be criticized, if it's to be criticized at all. And he coined the term Israelophobia for the book, and there was one commentator below there's this YouTube comment that I think sums it up perfectly and sums up what it is with Abby. Piston Burner says, Jake Wallace-Simons uses incorrect methods to combat this and doesn't even understand what's going on. The reason why most of anti-Israel sentiment exists is because it conforms to leftist ideology. And as it's part of leftist ideology, therefore leftists and leftism will protect it and allow it to be in the mainstream. It's a political issue, and one which is included in the most important realm of politics, leftism and neo-Marxism. Leftists can't stand any resistance or nonconformity to their politics. Because Israel refuses to A, totally conform to leftist policies, or B, refuses to be a poor third world victim, therefore leftists don't control it, and therefore they hate it and will battle it until it submits to their will. To combat anti-Israeli politics and hate, you must defeat the leftists. Making up fake phobias and other false slogans is dishonest, and therefore intelligent, balanced people don't respect such behavior. Right. He might be right. But that's the insight into what's going on with Abby. It's this kind of control freak behavior. And it reaches its apex later in the interview when Abby says this about Netanyahu.
If we look at the 5-day truce that happened several months back, the Palestinian hostages that Israel's been keeping, they're not called hostages, but they should be because they're just political prisoners that are languishing in military detention. The vast majority of those political prisoners were not charged with anything. 30 of them were kids for throwing stones. So this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. When Hamas says release our hostages, that's who they're talking about. When they say the removal of Israeli troops from Gaza, I don't see how that couldn't be complied with. I mean, look, there should be a negotiated settlement. If you want the hostages back today, that could happen. And that's why there's thousands of Israelis protesting in the street.
Well, Hamas have just rejected the latest peace deal offering.
Well, okay, is it a permanent ceasefire? Because if you're just talking about a 6-week ceasefire before, well then, yeah. I mean, Israel's saying they're just going to continue the genocide after 6 weeks. How is that
do you think?
That's a concession
let me ask you this
Israel?
before I go back to
won at the
before
end,
I go back to Emily. Let me
time.
ask you this, Abby. Do you think Hamas should stay in power at the end of this?
Look, I'm whatever the Palestinians want. That's
what do you think?
That's what they will do. I mean, I think. Look, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Palestinians of who their leadership should be. What I will say is Hamas isn't actually the most popular faction in Palestinian society. And Hamas is only the result of Israeli policy of brutal apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and occupation. That's why Hamas exists. Any type of Palestinian leadership that has arisen is a direct result of Israeli brutality. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of Palestinians and say what should or should not happen or who they should and should not elect. But I will say that Hamas is a democratically elected leadership of the Gaza Strip. I understand that there will be blowback and that inevitably violence will happen if these policies maintain in place.
Should Netanyahu remain in power in Israel after this?
No.
Oh, hang on.
I think that the Israeli people have spoken about Netanyahu, but I think that Netanyahu is the tip of the iceberg. To blame this all on Netanyahu and his so-called right-wing government is to wash away the foundation of what Israel is.
Should he stay in power after this?
No, he's committing genocide. No.
So you're prepared to say to the Israeli people, no,
well,
your leaders should go.
Here's the thing.
You're not prepared to tell Palestinian people that their leadership should go.
But here's the thing.
Again, the inconsistency.
The Israeli people are out in the streets in the tens of thousands saying Netanyahu should go.
There are many Palestinians who want Hamas to go too, I'm sure. The point is, you made a big deal of saying
then have an election.
You made a big deal of saying
You
made a big deal of saying it's not down to me to tell Palestinian people about their leadership, and then you immediately I give you the open door on Netanyahu. Yeah, absolutely, he should go. Totally inconsistent.
Well, he should be tried at The Hague and put in The Hague. And
that's a different question.
I mean, he's committing
different
genocide.
Question. But you say you can't interfere in Palestinian politics, but you're very prepared to interfere in Israeli politics.
He should be tried in The Hague. You know, he should be made an example of so that Israel never goes this far against Hamas ever again. And she's asked, what about Hamas? Should they stay in power? She says, well, it's not up to me. It's up to the Palestinians. If it's not up to you what happens to Hamas, then why is it up to you what happens to Netanyahu? Why is it up to you to decide that, you know, Hamas should be enabled whilst the ones who are trying to end Hamas should be punished? That's warped, and it really shows the kind of stakes we're up against. Because if Netanyahu ends up in The Hague for war crimes, for fighting this war, this necessary war to end Hamas, and he fails to end Hamas and he goes to jail, then whoever succeeds him will not be able to fight this war with the same ruthlessness necessary to end Hamas, which means Hamas gets to win. Again and again and again. And they get to know that they can get away with what they did on October the 7th. They can say, we did that, we succeeded. And Abiy, was happy to throw the victims under the bus and say, you win, Hamas. You're allowed to win. You're the resistance. You're allowed to do anything you want. I don't have a red line for you.
There should be no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. None. Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization that carried out the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and is still holding dozens of innocent people hostage, including Americans. Furthermore, the United States has been clear since well before the current conflict that the ICC has no jurisdiction over this matter. The ICC was established by its state parties as a court of limited jurisdiction. These limits are rooted in principles of complementarity, which do not appear to have been applied here, amid the prosecutor's rush to seek these arrest warrants, rather than allowing the Israeli legal system a full and timely opportunity to proceed.
But it's what he says, it's that she is a control freak, but she's also wants to appear progressive and say, well, look, I believe in self-determination for all people. Abiy, you don't respect the self-determination of the Israeli people, of the Israeli government, when it's facing an existential threat. Because you think that Hamas should be allowed to win and destroy Israel as a state, wipe out its people. You all do, all of you on the left do. I mean, when it comes to this, like I said before, I drew that analogy of, why is the comparison between Israel and Nazism so often drawn? And it's my charitable reading at first, in younger days, when I saw this going about during the 2014 war. And, I saw it as a case of, it's trying to tell the Jews, remember what the people who terrorized you, and consider what you've become. You've become the thing you hate. Abiy, how did you become the thing you hate?
I've never seen such abuse of power, such brutality of a military. I thought Bolivia was bad. This is far worse. There was no accountability. How could they rape and kill nuns who were working with the poor?
4 American churchwomen, Mara Clark, Jean Donovan, Edith Ford, and Dorothy Castle, were part of a clergy to aid the poor in countries where massacres of civilians were rampant. On December 2, 1980, they were stopped by the Salvadorian National Guard. All 4 were taken at gunpoint by the soldiers to be raped and tortured. They were killed by being hacked to death.
You were horrified of what happened to those women who were raped in El Salvador, those nuns who were raped and butchered and murdered. You would have been disgusted at the prospect, or at least you would have acted disgusted at the prospect of having them thrown under the bus. And the regime that did that to them being able to stay in power with American backing. And yet you're happy for Hamas to stay in power with UN backing, Iranian backing, and with you making sure that Israel never gets rid of them. How did you become the thing you hate, Abiy? Someone who would throw those women under the bus.
You don't qualify even to be a mother.
When Abiy Martin started her series, she said that the Empire Files was a means to show how we could empower on-the-ground activism and revolution against what she saw as an evil system.
At home, the empire rots. Economic warfare abounds. In the richest country in human history, millions sit in poverty. Militarized riot cops stalk with impunity. Racism entrenched. The surveillance state spies unhinged, and political opposition incessantly quashed. The system can't afford alternatives, and we've seen how far it will go, with no remorse. It's a machine that runs on death and destruction, killing thousands of our brothers and sisters every day. But every empire falls. And the history of empire is the history of resistance to it, where people have won time and again against impossible odds to defeat their subjugation. A world dominated by US hegemony and the corporate power structure it serves is cracking. And our digital age provides the great ability to build empathy, consciousness, and global solidarity. Information is power. We need to fight to unmask the empire every day in order to stop it. And every file here is a tool that will arm us in battle. Abby Martin, logging out.
As with most revolutionaries, we don't really stop to think about what that means. Sadly, October the 7th ensured that now we do. I just didn't know that Abby meant this. I don't know if even Abby herself at the time knew this. I think she was still a work in progress in terms of her left-wing ideology. She was still learning, forming a worldview.
Well, it's so interesting because, you know, I agree with you, of course. I mean, the dehumanization of Palestinians has been seeded for so long. It's always been conflated with the war on terror. Palestinians have always been depicted as terrorists, and, you know, and Israeli soldiers as the heroic good guys fighting these barbaric, you know, monsters, essentially. And that's always how it's been depicted in the Western media. However, now, with the advent of social media, with the fact that Palestinians are able to dictate their reality, I mean, aren't people seeing the same videos that we are? I mean, even if you have dehumanized brown people or people in the Middle East and you've kind of associated them with the violence that you know, essentially, for a large part, the West has caused with, you know, the war on terror, etc., or just colonizing powers and all of these things that have happened in that region. But now we can humanize and empathize looking at the eyes of a mother wailing for her dead child. Look, Hamas is reacting. They're an armed resistance group trying to fight for their liberation.
Abby, do you
I'm
think
not
Hamas
justifying
is a terrorist
anything that they've
organization?
done. The United States also called Nelson Mandela and the ANC a terrorist organization. I think they're an armed resistance group trying to fight for the liberation of Palestine.
Or has Abigail Martin always been a demonic narcissist? Has she always had a personality disorder, a psychotic lack of empathy? I don't know. But I know that I will never, ever see her as anything but a disgrace again. I am ashamed I was ever a follower of hers. She was there when I was undergoing some sort of political awakening, which I had to decide what I believed. You know, she was there when I was forming a new worldview on politics in the world. But like I said, disillusionment in what you once believed, it can sometimes lead you to believe anything and become a master of your own lies, even. As long as you tell yourself that it's against the Western war machine. That's how leftist figures become figures of disgrace now, even though they were seen as heroes of the day. And this is kind of what this video is about, really. Before, when I started on the Empire Files series, it was new to me. It was new to me to enter into this realm of media politics. I'd watched Adam Curtis, I'd watched Michael Moore. I guess I was always looking for the kind of leftist media types who could present a case for leftism that was not as repulsive as those stop the war meetings where you felt completely out of place there if you even thought that 9/11 was worth getting outraged about. It's like no one there did. Everyone there was very crass and cold to it. And yeah, they're kind of averse to confrontation, so they just found ways to excuse it and say, oh, the appalling social skills that tended to be there, those media, but everyone just wanted to get along with just being pacifist, being like-minded, getting along with the echo chamber, and spouting whatever was deemed agreeable. We'll get heads nodding. Sometimes, like, there were documentaries by Adam Curtis or Abby Martin that kind of thought, you know what, I can get behind this. I don't feel like I get it. I can get behind it. And I think that's how leftism began to capture the youth, especially after the debacles of the financial crisis and the Iraq debacle and the Syria debacle, the Libya debacle, and then the Trump years, of course. The thing is, I didn't have a frame of reference for who to avoid at the time. So when I was introduced to Max Blumenthal by Abby Martin, I was new to that world. I hadn't sifted out, filtered out trusted sources and untrustworthy sources. These people were kind of becoming media darlings on the left. There was no one there pointing out that they weren't people to trust. So actually, on the basis of Abby Martin's interviews with Max Blumenthal, I actually did buy some of Max Blumenthal's books. I even bought Goliath, and I bought the 51-Day War. I even read a bit of the 51-Day War during this war to, I decided it was time to give it a read and understand what the war might look like on the ground. But even as I read it, there was this gleeful tone to it of, every time it described a mass fighter doing an ambush on an IDF tank or something, there was this kind of glory and glee about, they made a kill on these IDF soldiers, and there was no it wasn't presented in a kind of every life lost is tragic in this war situation, or even these are just the cold hard facts of the war. It was gleeful. It was celebrating Hamas anti-Semitic murderers every time they killed Jewish soldiers. It left a very nasty aftertaste, and that's why I never really finished the book. And I am frankly considering burning those books now. Because the book is getting burnt. I've had it with you. I've had it with all you fucking Hamas scumbags. You filth. You trash. Stoking lies. Stoking division. Stoking anti-Semitism. Even though you're a fucking Jew yourself. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with you. You're twisted. You are sick in the head. You're a rape apologist piece of shit. This was the final straw for me. The reason why I decided to burn his books. At Morehouse's commencement, Joe Biden falsely claimed he saw pictures of Palestinians tying a mother and a daughter in a rope, pouring kerosene on them, burning them, and watching as they died. No such photos exist. Yet another sickening lie to justify Israel's genocide. And yet still he's going to peddle this sick little lie that, it's being made up. Hamas are innocent of it. It's vile that he lies that way about what was done to innocent civilians. What was done to peace-loving families and the kibbutzes in Israel. And he's going to lie about it. He's so poisonous. There's just something sick about the way he lies. And I've had enough. Enough's enough. I've reached breaking point with him. I'm just going to burn his works. That's his other book, Goliath. I never even started this, So I've bought it, but I'll never read it. Don't want it. Don't want to pass it on to anyone. I don't care. I do not give a shit. He's a lying scumbag. And, yep. fuck you, Mac. And fuck you, Abby Martin. You evil, twisted bitch. Okay. Whole pan's full. Should I keep this just as a memento of what I burnt? I don't know. I could just throw it in the bin rather than burn it, I suppose. Don't have to burn it, necessarily. I'm not sure where I'd take it to get burnt. Could take it to a park, but I feel like I'd probably get a few complaints from the locals. I'll have to make my mind up on that. This is before April 13th when Iran struck. Well, Israel had kind of hit a military consulate in Syria that housed Iran and members of Hezbollah. And Israel decided to make a strike there and then on the top brass of Hezbollah. And Max Blumenthal wrote about it here. He says, the Syrian state has been weakened by years of a NATO-sponsored dirty war and subsequent Western starvation sanctions. Early on in the dirty wars, CIA-backed so-called rebels destroyed close to 50% of the Syrian army's anti-aircraft batteries, improving freedom of operations for the Israeli Air Force. Since then, Israel has carried out hundreds of airstrikes on Syrian territory with near total impunity. This is the background for Israel's assassination of a senior IRGC general at Iran's consulate in Syria today. Though the Syrian state may be too debilitated to respond directly, the assassination will not deter Iran or Hezbollah from executing their post-October the 7th plans. So acknowledging that it's a retaliation to October the 7th plan, to October the 7th, it's legitimate. You're acknowledging that Iran spearheaded October the 7th. The bombing was obviously devised to provoke the resistance axis. Interfering from a strategy that balances confrontation with caution and escalating to the point where the US, as Israel's sworn regional protector, is drawn into the conflict. Given the result of past assassinations of top IRGC officials, there is no reason to believe Israel will achieve this effect either. Israel's deliberate attempting of escalation will ultimately be proven a fatal mistake. Its military cannot withstand heavy casualties like other regional forces. Much of its Ashkenazi population, its intelligentsia and secularocratic elite, securitocratic elite possesses foreign passports, and its economy is already suffering gravely from the October the 7th effect. Under the influence of religious nationalism, Israel's political class has degenerated to a point where it is incapable of rational decision-making or effective propaganda, and the Israeli military has proven unable to achieve any of its stated objectives in Gaza after close to 6 months of fighting against a besieged collection of militias with locally made weapons. In a generation, we will witness both the regional balance of power and US domestic politics shift decisively against Israel's interests. The process is accelerating at a rate that has outpaced my pre-October the 7th expectations. Today, the overwhelming shock of Alaska flood feels like a preview of a much more decisive blow against Zionism. Indeed, the day is coming when a conglomeration of forces will take the initiative and will, to invert a line from Ezekiel, execute great vengeance upon Israel with furious rebukes. At that point, its only form of deterrence will be its secret nuclear arsenal, and it may be pointing toward the west. What a scumbag. What a creepy scumbag. It's like he's happy at the prospect of Israel losing the war and it failing as a nation to vile regimes like Iran and Syria that he acknowledges masterminded October the 7th. And trying to spread this blood libel that Israel is going to turn on America any chance it gets.
There is no conflict between Israel and Palestine. Israel-Palestine is a single unitary state, and it is a conquest being carried out by the Jewish state in order to dispossess and ghettoize as many Palestinians as possible. It's been going on for 70 years. The population of the Gaza Strip are 80% refugees living in the second most overcrowded area on earth. They are the victims of this ongoing campaign of dispossession, and that's the root of their resistance. When they turn to violence, it is because of that 70-year legacy of dispossession. We need to see that and the siege, the ongoing siege, the 8-year-long siege of the Gaza Strip, which has de-developed this area deliberately as part of 70 years of dispossession, ghettoization, and expulsion.
Max Blumenthal did present himself as the moral voice in here about saying, this is slaughter, this is, no condemnations, this is where are our Jewish values that are supposed to speak against this kind of slaughter.
I'm not a spokesman for Hamas. I'm not a spokesman for Hamas. I'm not a spokesman for Hamas. I'm not a spokesman for Hamas, and I'm not going to defend their political goals. What we're talking about here is a ghettoized population that's being completely decimated before our eyes, entire families being wiped out. And Morton mentioned rockets from Hamas. They have killed less than 13 people in the last decade. How many Palestinians ghettoized in the Gaza Strip have been slaughtered in this campaign of ghetto cleansing by the Israeli Air Force? How many? We're talking about over 1,300 in just the course of less than 2 weeks, and I doubt that Morton will condemn this or even put a limit on the amount of civilian casualties that he will be able to tolerate. We've seen this from no Jewish establishment leaders in the U.S., no moral limit.
This kind of cruelty, this is supposed to be against our values. And then one day, and at the time I took it that he just felt a sense of Jewish guilt about what Israel was doing, a sense of moral duty to speak against Israel's conduct of the war. And then I saw this video by him.
The Jewish question here, where I've been branded one of the top 10 anti-Semites 2 years running on the list of this race hustler organization called the Simon Wiesenthal Foundation. I'm kind of at peace with that too, because I don't see Zionists as part of something that I don't see them as, I don't feel any connection to them. I see them as actually members of a demonic cult, a satanic cult that hates humanity, that is completely comfortable with mass slaughter, which celebrates it if it doesn't deny it outright. And so why would I care what they say about me or want anything to do with them? Why do I care if they see me as a fellow Jew when I don't see them as a fellow human?
And I realized there was something far more deranged about him than I thought. That there was just had this warped misanthropy that seemed to see Zionists as, bloodthirsty, cult, and Hamas is somehow not that bad. It's like, the characterization he made of Zionists holds far more consistently to Hamas, and yet he claims he's not a spokesman for Hamas. He's just a creep. It's just a nasty piece of work. I did, after watching this, almost wonder or fancy that maybe what it was with Max was almost this idea of him fancying himself as the Judd Nelson member of the Brat Pack and saying, well, I don't respect our Jewish elders. I feel like I'm part of a teenage rebellion. And even though I'm in my 30s now, I still, think I'm rebelling against your brand of Zionism. And, I'm the rebel. I want to tear down your system. And it's like, that overgrown kind of Brat Pack, which is just weird considering what he's aligning himself with in the cause of that. Anyway, Useful Idiot, The Curious Case of Max Blumenthal by Bruce Bauer. Yeah, okay, you know what? I'm not going to bother with this. I'll insert this in later, but basically the article gives you the gist of all the things I didn't know because I went into it blind. I watched Abby's show. I thought that Max presented as an expert on a complex situation that I was still offensive from, but maybe I was setting my mind to being an activist on the left. But anyway, and I said here, so now you're defending Assad. Assad, who subjected the Palestinians in Yarmouk to a far worse siege than is happening in Gaza. What a despicable creep you are. And someone was actually good enough to link me to an article on Max Blumenthal by Bruce Bauer that really kind of dissected, like, really showed that he was not a trustworthy source, and that I made a blind purchase of his books. Useful Idiot, The Curious Case of Max Blumenthal by Bruce Bauer. And he says, Useful Idiot. Here's the article anyway. Now, here's the article I probably should have read before I ever bought a single book by Max Blumenthal. Now, for the record, Max Blumenthal was the first to spin this denialist take on October the 7th, and I was, even though I knew he was left-wing, and even though I knew he was kind of pro-Palestine, I was still shocked. I guess, like Abby Martin, I was still expecting, a red line to be declared when it came to October the 7th, and for them to say, okay, we're not siding with Hamas in this. And I think it's like I said in The Doctors on the Left, I think the problem is the entire basis of Max's argument in that adversarial debate he had about the 2014 war was him scoffing at the idea that Hamas, for all their vile anti-Semitic genocidal rhetoric, he was saying, well, look, that they don't have the means to carry out their policy, whereas Israel do, and they are. It's like, the lack of ability kind of, excuses them for means they should be let off lightly for having the intent to genocide Israel. And he was scoffing at the idea that Hamas will ever be a threat to Israel that's worth this kind of retaliation. Now, October the 7th proved him wrong, but there was no humility shown. I didn't really expect any humility shown, but what he showed was worse than no humility. He proved that he was completely on side with Hamas. He romanticized Hamas, and he kind of, made up all these conspiracy theories that romanticized Hamas as being not that bad. He's kind of the reason why Abby believes it. He probably is, she's probably following his lead, I think. You have to remember, Abby was the novice journalist, and she was speaking to what she saw as the expert, and that's how she became more and more radical. Anyway, Useful Idiot, The Curious Case of Max Blumenthal by Bruce Bauer. Its back cover features Economia from Reza Aslan, Andrew Cockburn, and Oliver Stone, and its jacket copy promises that readers will find in its pages the real story behind America's dealings with the world, and proof that the extremist forces that now threaten peace across the globe are the inevitable flowering of American imperial design. The book is The Management of Savagery, How America's National Security State Fueled the Rise of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Donald Trump. And its author is Max Blumenthal, the son of longtime Clinton associate Sidney Blumenthal. How the son of a member of the Clinton inner circle came to write a book that is, in large part, an indictment of both Bill's presidency and Hillary's tenure as Secretary of State, as well as not incidentally an apologia for some of the most brutal tyrants and terrorist groups on the planet, is quite a story. It begins decades ago when Sidney, now 70, left a career in Beltway journalism to become an advisor in the Clinton White House. Ever since, he has been a major satellite in the Clinton orbit, writing a flattering book about Bill's presidency, taking a leading role in Hillary's 2008 campaign, working for several years thereafter at the Clinton Foundation, and serving to this day not only as an official consultant to Clinton Super PAC and the Clinton-linked Media Matters for America, but also as an informal Clinton confidant, counselor, and, as some would put it, courtier. At first, it looked as if Max, born in 1977, did not fall far from the tree. After studying history at the University of Pennsylvania, he set out on a career as a left-leaning political journalist for publications such as The Nation and Salon. From the beginning, he was, like his father, nakedly partisan, focusing on targets such as Fox News, the Heritage Foundation, and various GOP politicians. Rarely, if ever, did he treat his ideological opposites as honest brokers with whom he merely had a difference of opinion. No. Almost invariably, he sought to discredit them, to tar them with guilt by association, to paint them, however decent, independent, and mainstream they might be, as extremists, bigots, and tools of nefarious interests. And, not infrequently, to mount extremely personal assaults, complete with unfounded rumours and even outright lies. In all this, he was his father's son, for Sidney Blumenthal had long been known to go very far indeed in service to the Clinton cause. In his now woefully dated first book, Republican Gomorrah, Max Blumenthal depicted a GOP controlled by evangelical Christians and obsessed with abortion and homosexuality, and he purported to psychoanalyze the party's leaders using methods employed by Erich Fromm in his 1941 study of the Nazi mind, Escape from Freedom. It was one of countless anti-Republican jeremiads by the loyal sons of the left, and one that many of his fellow Democrats could therefore applaud without hesitation. It was his second book, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel, 2013, published by Nation Books, that marked Max Blumenthal as a genuine outlier. In describing the Israeli-Palestine situation, he could hardly have been more extreme. He blamed the tensions between these two parties almost entirely on Israel's purported love of violence and hatred for Muslims, and he excused jihadist terror as the understandable response by innocent victims to Nazi-like oppressors. Though presented as a work of reportage, the book was in fact a grotesquely slanted polemic. Max Blumenthal emphasized and exaggerated everything that might make the Israel Defense Forces and Israelis generally look like the most reprehensible, immoral of human beings, while suppressing facts that showed Hamas terrorists and other Palestinians in a less than favorable light. Even his comrades on the hard left couldn't give Goliath a thumbs up. In a column for The Nation headlined The I Hate Israel Handbook, Eric Alterman, himself a frequent and severe critic of the Jewish state, wrote that the book would likely alienate anyone but the most fanatical anti-Zionist extremists. Goliath could have been published by the Hamas Book of the Month Club, Alterman said, while declaring that Max Blumenthal shames all of us with his presence in our magazine. Nina Burley, another Clinton partisan, so dedicated that she once said she would perform a sex act on the president as a reward for his pro-abortion stance, described Blumenthal in the New York Observer as having staked out a spot in the Venn diagram of Middle East commentators where anti-Israel meets pro-Islamist. Nothing in Goliath, she lamented, indicated that Blumenthal was much troubled by rebels who dream of the once and future caliphate and imposing Sharia law. Extreme though Goliath was, after it came out, Blumenthal continued his pilgrimage away from the establishment left. Blumenthal's anti-Israel screed, reported the Times of Israel in 2014, had become progressively more outlandish. In that same year, Blumenthal publicized a new hashtag, JSIL, short for Jewish State in the Levant, the point of which was to draw an explicit moral equivalence between Israel and ISIS. The next year saw the publication of his third book, The 51-Day War, Ruin and Resistance in Gaza. It was marketed, like Goliath, as a piece of reportage, in this case a comprehensive on-the-ground account of the 6-week 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. But as it turned out, again like Goliath, this new book was a work of pure propaganda, its assertions undergirded by a miasma of facts, quasi-facts, and non-facts. Notwithstanding Blumenthal's claims, it emerged soon after the book's release that he had personally witnessed less than 2 weeks of the war. During most of it, he had been back home in the United States. Not that he really needed to be in Israel and Gaza at all, the book's conclusions having plainly been formed before he stepped off the plane at Ben Gurion Airport. Once more, the IDF were the bad guys, barely distinguishable from the SS, while Hamas was a knight in shining armour. During the period where he was writing these first 3 books, one step taken by Blumenthal stood out as being just possibly an act of principle. In 2011, he became a staff writer for the English language online edition, of the Lebanese daily Al Akhbar. But the following year he resigned, denouncing the newspaper's editors as apologists for Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. Much of the journalism he produced during the next couple of years conveyed a strongly anti-Assad message. In 2013, he reported for The Nation from a refugee camp in Jordan where he wrote, "Every single Syrian he interviewed supported a US military strike on their homeland." Then something happened. We don't know exactly what it was. All we know for certain is that in December 2015, Blumenthal travelled to Moscow, all expenses paid by the Kremlin, to attend a gala dinner hosted by Vladimir Putin himself to celebrate the 10th anniversary of RT, the international TV network owned by the Russian government. When he returned to the US, his position on Assad and on US intervention in Syria had turned around completely. Only a month after the RT bash, Blumenthal founded something called the Grey Zone Project, which describes itself as a news and politics website dedicated to original investigative journalism and analysis on war and empire. Basically, however, Grey Zone is a one-stop propaganda shop devoted largely to pushing a pro-Assad line on Syria, a pro-regime line on Venezuela, a pro-Putin line on Russia, and a pro-Hamas line on Israel and Palestine. Earlier in his career, Blumenthal had considered Muslim theocracies preferable to secular autocracies and had treated criticisms of Sharia law and Islamic governments, however reasonable and fact-based that criticism might be, as proof of anti-Muslim hatred. Now, however, by way of propping up the Assad dictatorship, he did not hesitate to malign Assad's Syrian opponents, many of whom were Christians, Jews, and secular Muslims, as fanatical jihadists or allies thereof. Among those he now maligned were the White Helmets, a group of volunteers who conduct search and rescue operations, carry out medical and civilian evacuations, and deliver essential goods and services in Syrian danger zones. The group has saved more than 100,000 lives. More than 200 of its members have lost their lives. It has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, but none of this kept him from joining lustily in the Assad regime's campaign to discredit it. In his attacks on the White Helmets, notably in an article that appeared in October 2nd, 2016, as well as in a number of other articles and tweets, Blumenthal pointed out that the group took money from US aid and accused it of being a creation of Western governments, professional activists, and public relations specialists that were drawing attention to Syrian atrocities solely as a means of bolstering the argument for American intervention. He even charged the group with having al-Qaeda links and repeated the basest calumny spread by Assad loyalists that some members of the White Helmets had been implicated in atrocities carried out by jihadist rebel groups. Blumenthal isn't alone at Grey Zone, which after a 2-year-long association with the left-wing Alternet website went independent when Max was fired from it. The principal contributor to Grey Zone is Ben Norton, a former Salon staff who became pro-Assad around the same time, perhaps indeed at exactly the same time that Blumenthal did. After his conversion, Norton even took care to remove his old anti-Assad writings from the internet. In addition to providing content for Grey Zone, Norton and Blumenthal co-host a podcast and video show titled Moderate Rebels. On recent episodes, they have presented the real story about Venezuela as told by Chavista scholars and mocked Univision journalist Jorge Ramos for telling Nicolas Maduro in an interview that he was widely considered a dictator. Implicit in pretty much every item at the website is that it's impossible to be an opponent of Putin or Assad or Nicolas Maduro without having nefarious motives. Either you're working for the CIA or Mossad, or you're tied up with some terrorist group, or you've taken dirty money under the table, or you have business interests, probably shady, that would benefit from regime change. Even as Blumenthal is a reliable content provider for Grey Zone, he continues to comment elsewhere on a wide range of topics. He remains a staunch champion of Islam, routinely responding to explicit acts of jihadist terror by denying their Islamic roots. After the June 2016 massacre at the Pulse Gay nightclub in Orlando, which took 49 lives and wounded 53, he denied the perpetrator Omar Mateen, who told a 911 operator that he was a mujahideen, an Islamic soldier, and that he owed his allegiance to ISIS head Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was a jihadist. After the May 2017 bombing at the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, which killed 22 and injured 139, Blumenthal attributed it to blowback from interventionist policies by the West. In a 2016 article, he denied the incontrovertible fact that anti-gay prejudice is intrinsic to Islam, calling the idea a product of talking points, first honed by the Israeli government and its international network of supporters. That's not all. Blumenthal has also denied that Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. Those who say otherwise, Blumenthal maintained, are actually irked not over Corbyn's Jew hatred, but over his anti-imperialist sentiments. While quick to stand up for Corbyn, Blumenthal was equally quick to deride Elie Wiesel after the latter's death in July 2016, accusing the Auschwitz survivor and Nobel Peace Prize laureate of inciting hatred, defending apartheid, and palling around with fascists. Blumenthal has written, moreover, about anti-communism as if it were a psychiatric affliction, and has dismissed the Victims of Communism Foundation as a neoconservative initiative. He's labelled Leopoldo Lopez, the Venezuelan freedom activist and long-time political prisoner under Maduro, a push leader. He's charged former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley with pursuing a vendetta against virtually the entire world, and he's called Clarissa Ward, CNN's chief international correspondent and host of the Peabody Award-winning 2016 documentary Undercover in Syria, an Al-Qaeda stooge. He even accused President Obama's UN ambassador, Samantha Power, whom precious few observers would categorize as pro-Israel, of being an anti-Palestinian Israeli tool. Some of Blumenthal's smears are near epic in scale. In a June 2012 piece for The Nation, he took on the philanthropist Neo Rosenwald, head of the Gatestone Institute, for funding Israel-friendly groups as well as a who's who of anti-Muslim outfits, and thereby fueling a rapidly emerging alliance between the pro-Israel mainstream and the Islamophobic fringe that serves to sanitize and legitimize professional anti-Muslim bigots. Among those bigots were Irshad Manji and Sudi Jasser. Oh? Manji and Jasser are themselves Muslims, but their support for Israel and US counter-terrorism measures and their acknowledgement of Islam's need for democratic reform places them, in Blumenthal's view, beyond the pale. Blumenthal also brought up the Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik's references in his manifesto to certain beneficiaries of Rosenwald's largesse, which for Blumenthal was enough to consider her tainted. He also tarred Rosenwald for funding the invaluable Middle East Monitoring and Research Institute, whose subtitled online postings of Arabic-language TV programs provide abundant evidence of the hatred of the West, Jews, gays, and independent-minded females disseminated daily around the Middle East. No smear job by Max Blumenthal would be complete without an unfounded personal attack, so in his piece on Rosenwald, one was able to read this bit of gossip. According to an acquaintance of his, Rosenwald has a penchant for launching into anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian tirades at public forums, leaping up like a jack-in-the-box to denounce the evildoers. As it happens, I've been present over the past 2 decades at a great many public forums attended by Rosenwald, and I had never observed any behaviour on her part that would remotely fit this description. I've also spoken with other people whose paths have crossed Rosenwald's frequently, and none of them have ever experienced such conduct either, or heard it from anyone else. In short, another dose of pure calumny. In 2013, writing at the Electronic Intifada website, Blumenthal sought to take down Thor Halvorsen, the founder of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, the Human Rights Foundation, and the Oslo Freedom Forum. The piece provided a splendid example of his 6 degrees of separation approach to guilt by association. Halvorsen, Blumenthal explained, was a bad person because his organizations had received significant funding from the same financiers, such as the Sarah Schaaf Foundation and the Lind and Harry Bradley Foundation, who support the Islamophobes, read mainstream conservative critics of Islam, who inspired anti-Muslim Norwegian mass killer Anders Behring Breivik. Yes, Breivik again. Note that Blumenthal doesn't hesitate to blame one lunatic's massacre on critics of Islam who have never called for violence, but he refuses to acknowledge that innumerable jihadists have, in fact, as they themselves proudly declare, murdered countless innocents in obedience to what they regard as the divine commandments set down in the Quran. Blumenthal's piece on Halvorsen also displayed his taste for selective quotation and the cherry-picking of evidence. The half-truths and smears in the article are too numerous to mention. As a student at the University of Pennsylvania, Halverson had noted in an op-ed for the college paper that it may be deadly to live in West Philadelphia. Blumenthal presented the op-ed as evidence of racism since that neighborhood is largely African American. In fact, Halverson's op-ed was motivated by the murder in West Philadelphia of his friend Almoz Iqbal Ali Muhammad, a Pakistani Muslim's teaching assistant who had been shot in a robbery. Similarly, Blumenthal called FIRE a right-wing group because it had defended evangelical students against charges of anti-gay discrimination and combating hate crime legislation. Unmentioned was the fact that FIRE, under Halverson's leadership, had also defended radical leftist Ward Churchill. Unmentioned was the fact that FIRE, under Halverson's leadership, had also defended radical leftist Ward Churchill, Peter members, and innumerable gays and Muslims, including Sami al-Arian, a Palestinian professor arrested on terrorism charges. Another lengthy smear appeared in 2017 at Alternet. This time, Blumenthal's target was Daily Beast editor and fresh CNN hire Michael Weiss, co-author of the New York Times bestseller ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. Under the headline, CNN analyst Michael Weiss hosted anti-Muslim rally with far-right hate queen Pamela Geller. Blumenthal upbraided Weiss for the crime of having helped Geller put together a protest against plans for a so-called Ground Zero mosque in Lower Manhattan. This was false. Weiss had had nothing to do with that event. Weiss was also scorned for having organised a New York rally in solidarity with the Mohammed cartoonist in Denmark. This was true. Among the participants was the Danish Consul General. In his efforts to blacken Weiss's name, Blumenthal reached back to Weiss's undergraduate days at Dartmouth when one of the comic strips that Weiss contributed to the student paper showed a gay frat pledge, involuntarily becoming sexually aroused during a hazing ritual. Again, leave it to a man who had whitewashed Islamic regime's execution of gay people to point to a harmless cartoon as an indication of vicious homophobia. But Weiss's major offence, in Blumenthal's eyes, was opposing Assad and Putin. Weiss, complained Blumenthal, dared to write about Russia even though he speaks little or no Russian. This from a man who had written books on Israel and the Palestinians without being fluent in either Hebrew or Arabic. In another characteristic move, Blumenthal noted that a website run by Weiss had been funded by a former billionaire, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, whose 8 years as a prisoner of conscience in Putin's Russia Blumenthal omitted to mention. But whose allegedly corrupt business practices prior to his incarceration he banged away about at length. Blumenthal treated other associates of Weiss in a similar fashion, in addition to targeting drive-by smears at other writers whose politics diverged from his own. The Gay Spectator contributor Douglas Murray wrote Blumenthal was xenophobic and a hardcore Islamophobe, while Ayn Hirsi Ali, the heroic Muslim apostate and critic of Islam who has to live with around-the-clock bodyguards because of jihadist death threats, was a Dutch anti-Muslim activist and serial fabricator. In an article for Medium in December 2018, foreign correspondent Salome Anderson announced that she was suing Blumenthal and his colleague Ben Norton. As part of their dangerous campaign of disinformation against people whose work threatens Russian and Syrian interests, she charged, they'd accused her of being an agent of the US or Israeli governments. Anderson speaks Arabic, has reported from the Middle East for such outlets as The Atlantic, NBC News, The Daily Beast, and Newsweek, and is the daughter of the AP reporter Terry Anderson, who was held captive by Hezbollah for 6 years between 1985 and 1991. Salome Anderson made it clear that while she was extremely reluctant to challenge anyone's free speech rights, she felt compelled to file the lawsuit because the steady drumbeat of lies about her from Blumenthal and Norton had compromised her and her sources' personal safety when she's working in danger zones. They need to understand, she wrote, that there are consequences for putting reporters like her in harm's way. A few months after Anderson's announcement came the publication of Blumenthal's The Management of Savagery. It is a critique of the enthusiasm of many American officials, including politicians in both major parties, for international military intervention. This enthusiasm, the author argues, led the US government to fund terrorist groups during the Cold War that would later become its enemies, and also led America to get mired in Iraq. This unnecessary foreign adventurism helped elect Donald Trump, and that election in turn caused the DC establishment to push the argument that Putin had played a pivotal role in Trump's victory. Many Americans across the political spectrum will concur with Blumenthal about much, if not all, of the above. While many reasonable readers might share his view that, say, the US invasion of Iraq wasn't a good idea, they would likely balk at his claim that the negative image of Saddam Hussein of the US was the product of dishonest propaganda. Iraq, claims Blumenthal, was stable before the US intervention. The US invasion. Well, that's one way to put it. Then there's Blumenthal's distinction between the US and Soviet invasions of Afghanistan. The former, he maintains, was a hostile act of imperialism, period, whereas the 1979 incursion by the USSR was motivated by an admirable desire to stabilize an anarchic society, and it had the effect of introducing a socialist government that had benign consequences for Afghanis. What about 9/11? During a nearly 2-hour-long presentation at his book launch, which can be viewed on YouTube, Blumenthal mentioned 9/11 only to deplore the immediate response of some Americans to that monstrous atrocity and to call them Islamophobes. The attitudes towards infidels that actually drove those Muslims to commit that act of mass murder went unremarked. For him, the salient fact about 9/11 is that the US, since that day, has been awash in Islamophobia, which he described as the language of a wounded empire. The implication here, of course, is that 9/11 was a wound that the empire amply deserves. Blumenthal savages post-9/11 counter-terrorism efforts in New York City and elsewhere as the work of bigots, but he drops down the memory hole the innumerable post-9/11 acts of Islamic terror in the US and Europe. He is far kinder to the blind sheikh, Omar Abdel Rahman, who masterminded the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, than to the late Chris Kyle, the Navy SEAL whose life became the subject of Clint Eastwood's movie American Sniper. So it goes. According to Blumenthal, those who believe that there are terrorist cells in the US or that some American Muslims cheer the fall of the Twin Towers on 9/11 have fallen for a folk myth. The only people who celebrated 9/11, he said at his book launch, were a mysterious group of Israelis. He also mocks the idea of creeping Sharia, as exemplified by, for instance, the arrest, harassment and prosecution of critics of Islam in many Western countries, and the increasing recognition by Western governments of Islamic marriage laws. On the subject of jihad, Blumenthal is inconsistent. In some cases, he seems to recognize it as rooted in religion, but more often he treats it as if it's always blowback against Western imperialism. He has no doubt, however, that the idea of jihadists hate us because we're free is a crude mantra. One striking feature about the management of savagery is Max Blumenthal's bluntness about the Clintons, Sydney's personal cause for decades. The Clinton Foundation, Max writes, accepted tens of millions from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and other sources, even as some of those donors were propping up ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Blumenthal doesn't shrink from blaming Hillary for pushing the Russiagate story, which he describes as a national security state narrative, or from blaming Bill for ignoring the threat of Al-Qaeda during his presidency. At his book launch, Blumenthal stated quite bluntly that owing to their actions in Libya, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton helped bring slavery back to Africa. Some of the arguments made by Blumenthal in this book have been made before by respected writers on both the left and the right who oppose what they see as reflexive and counterproductive US interventions abroad, and as with portions of his previous work, many readers with mainstream views will find these arguments congenial. But one cannot imagine that many readers with functioning moral compasses will respond with anything but disgust to the passages in which he defends the Assad regime, maintains that people in the West have a blinkered view of Assad, and denounces what he describes as the Western media's tendency to paint the Syrian conflict as a one-sided war between a maniacal dictator and his defenseless subjects. In his attempt to sugarcoat Assad, Blumenthal reminds us that in 1971, Assad's father sparked massive Muslim Brotherhood demonstrations by issuing a stringently secular constitution. Again and again in the management of savagery, Blumenthal insists that Assad's enemies in Syria are at least as bad as he is, that those enemies have been funded and abetted by the West, that other tyrants in the region are likewise no better than Assad, and that Assad and his circle have long been the targets of armed Sunni Islamist groups, presumably because Assad does not share their backward theocratic views. It is interesting to observe that whereas Blumenthal, prior to his Moscow trip, almost invariably stood up for Islamic theocracies, he now sees things the other way around and is willing to speak critically about Islamists. He is willing to do this, that is, so long as he can cast them as the tools or allies of the US or the West generally against Assad and Putin. The one constant in his view of these matters is that he has always been more critical of the US and other Western liberal democracies than of any tyrannical Middle Eastern regime, whether theocratic or secular. More than any other American writer who has reached his level of notoriety, Blumenthal has proven consistently to be too hard left even for some of the banner names of the hard left. Pro-Assad, pro-Maduro, pro-Putin, literally nothing redeemable about this fellow and his moronic second campism, tweeted the British white writer James Bloodworth, an old Trotskyite and long-time Guardian contributor on June the 9th. The good news is that more and more respectable members of the journalistic profession have woken up to the fact that Blumenthal's work is simply not to be trusted, that he is not a legitimate reporter but a propagandist. The bad news is that he is still able to get his books published and still has readers who, heaven help them, take his writing seriously. Perhaps even more striking to contemplate are the emails released by WikiLeaks in which Sidney Blumenthal proudly shares his son's writings with Hillary Clinton, who responded by praising them and even passing some of them around to her State Department colleagues. This included the epilogue to his Israel-bashing Gomorrah. I loved the epilogue, but it stopped abruptly, and I can't pull up the rest, so I'm anxiously awaiting for the rest. Hillary Clinton wrote to Sidney. Please congratulate Max for another impressive piece. He's so good. How sharper than a serpent's tooth is a Max Blumenthal? Been a piece of crap on there. No. Bye bye, Max Blumenthal's shitty, trashy, vile book. Oh shit. They're out of control now. We've done a bit out of control already, I think. Ow! Bloody hell. This is probably highly legal, but you know what? Worth the jail time to burn this shitty book by that scumbag. Oh, shit. Oh, bloody hell. Ashes to ashes, as they say. David Bernstein says, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I see so many tweets saying this is the end of Israel. Quite the opposite. Israel faced a real threat from the Hamas-Hezbollah-Iran axis. Hamas made a desperate attempt to undermine Israel, but it made two huge mistakes. First, it assumed its attack and hostage-taking would paralyze Israel. Wrong. Second, it jumped the gun. Hezbollah and Iran were unprepared for a full-on confrontation with Israel and potentially the US and declined to go to war to save Hamas. The anti-Israel NGOs, leftist activists and others have been building up to a moment like this since the Durban conference in 2001, trying to undermine Israel's right to defend itself in its legitimacy. They have had some success with popular opinion, but not enough. No significant country has recalled its ambassador. None of the Arab countries that have diplomatic ties with Israel have broken them. Saudi Arabia still plans a post-war peaceful relationship. US public opinion is holding firm. Despite Biden's equivocations, the US defense and intelligence establishment are trying to help Israel win. After the war, the other side will be spent. Iran will be revealed as a paper tiger. Hamas will be destroyed. Hezbollah will be in the crosshairs, and no, it can't rely on Iran. Israel will get rid of its current ridiculous government of misfits and get better leaders. The Israeli economy will resume its resilience, and immigration from abroad will once again pick up. The international anti-Israel left will have spent its ammo, and on the other side of the war, everyone sane will recognise what moral frauds they were, running interference for a genocidal terrorist group in the name of purported human rights. Meanwhile, one of Israel's weaknesses previously was that many in the Arab world thought that when the chips were down, Israelis would flee to the West. Instead, hundreds of thousands of reservists who were abroad came home to fight. Anyone sane will now recognise that Israel isn't going anywhere, certainly not voluntarily. Israel will still face two tough challenges: what to do about Gaza post-war, and most important, the Iranian nuclear threat. But ultimately, assuming Israel remains steadfast and defeats Hamas, Israel will be stronger than ever. Brendan O'Neill from Spike magazine has been saying, the left have finished. The left, the woke left, they've shown their true colours. They've shown their hypocrisy. They've sided with Hamas terrorists in their massacre of women, in their massacre of Jews, in their rape of women. And these are the woke left that supposedly stand against racism and against misogyny, against toxic masculinity. And they've shown themselves willing to throw victims of racism and misogyny and just of rape and murder, sick murder of women. They've been willing to throw them under the bus.
The kind of things I said early on, which we talked about last time, which was basically the reaction to 7th of October was to tell Israel to lay down their arms, don't overreact, don't go into Gaza, basically roll over and let Hamas kill you. That's essentially what people were saying. What I've thought over the past few weeks is that climate has actually got worse. You think it might improve over the following months, but actually it's got worse. And the same thing is being said to Israel now in relation to Rafah. We know for a fact that Hamas is in Rafah. We know that they're using UNRWA compounds in Rafah as bases from which to organize themselves. We know that they are holding Israeli hostages there. We know that they are firing missiles from Rafah into Israel. Some of them have killed IDF soldiers. Others have fallen on Israeli towns. And the intention there is obviously to slaughter Jewish people. So we know that Rafah is being used as a base for fascism, as a base for violence against the Jewish state, genocidal violence against the Jewish state. So the people telling the Jewish state not to go in there, not to get these people, essentially leave them alone. They're saying the same thing. They're saying, Jews, why don't you let yourselves be killed? What's the big deal? It's not the end of the world. So it's the same extraordinary double standard where Israel is expected to put up with a situation that no other state in the world would be expected to put up with.
And he's been saying for a while, well, this is it. Everyone can see what moral frauds the left are. The left are finished. Even there's one line I remember from him saying, the left are finished. It has no idea how finished it is. But that was said at the beginning of this war, and months on, I am not seeing it translate into, I was really not seeing it translate into truth, into anything real. Seemed that the left, the Free Palestine March was in its ascendance. It was getting stronger than ever, more popular than ever. And it was being reinforced constantly by the horrific war imagery, the war footage, the images of suffering Palestinians, the images of starving children, traumatized children, children being dragged out of rubble. All these horrific images that a lot of people were just motivated by these images to hate Israel and campaign against Israel and feel like there was no... It's a war in which, people on the Palestinian side, their heart breaks 1,000 times a day, and the image, it's Twitter is saturated with these images, unavoidably, and it's the same kind of philosophy of Abby Martin. The book, we're going to make sure, we're going to bombard you with this to make you care, because we feel that you don't care because you're racist, because we have this racist culture that values Palestinian life less than Israeli life, less than Western life. So we've got to push this forward. We've got to show this to the masses, and a lot of the masses are being drawn to this, the belief they have to resist this, they have to fight, they have to take action to stop Israel. And of course, South Africa seized its opportunity. The state of Colombia did, the state of Argentina did, even Justin Trudeau, who I have no idea why the hell he's managed to stay in power for this long. I have no idea. I have no idea why he hasn't been voted out years ago. Even he's kind of said that he's going to ban arms sales to Israel now. And Biden and Britain have been threatening to do the same. And I'm sure there are people in Labour who are mobilising to do the same. It seemed to me like the left is winning, not losing. That the campaign against Israel is just, it's unstoppable. They've been mobilised to an unstoppable momentum of, running against the war. But the hope I always cling to, based on that tweet, is that maybe that's happening now because of the propaganda of this war, and that maybe once that clears, once the saturation level propaganda stops, once there's no propaganda to recycle anymore, and in fact was some of the propaganda that led people to this, when things are urgent, people stick to their side, and when the war's over, the urgency will be gone, the momentum will be gone, the saturation level propaganda will be gone, some of it will be debunked, some of it will be disproven. If Israel win this, hopefully they'll have all the evidence receipts they need to prove just how corrupt the UN are, how much Hamas played this whole propaganda game. It'll become harder, and receipts will be kept on the side of this war that glorified Hamas. And there might come a point where the receipts are kept and the left is discredited. I keep on hoping that's what will happen. Because as far as I'm concerned, Abby Martin has disgraced herself. In a sane world, she would never get invited to anything again, but because of the nature of how much the left has dominated the industry, she's never going to become persona non grata. Her allies are too powerful. They've got her back. But she's dead to me, essentially. I bitterly regret that I ever gave her my time.
I don't see how anyone can come on a show
what
like
Israel
this.
is doing
How
is
can
wrong.
you take
Can
part
you
in a
ask
debate like
Emily
this and
that?
say
Is what Israel
killing
is
innocent
doing
civilians
to kill
is wrong,
13,000
but I'm not going to
civilians?
tell you what Hamas did on October 7th was wrong? It makes no sense, Abby. No sense.
I'm not going to sit here and condemn Hamas. I'm not going to do the obligatory ritual.
I hear you.
Ritual that everyone is browbeaten into doing. I'm just not going to do it, Piers.
I even feel I even kind of regret showing any clips of hers again. But I kept on thinking, at what point might that start to happen? What point might the tide start to turn? When it's like the hope, of course, in the tweet is that maybe the Palestinian movement is at its apex. It's at its peak. And once this war's over, it's the peak before the fall. And it's like, it's risen so high, higher than it's ever done before. And afterwards, it will fall so low than it ever has before. It'll be a discredited movement forever. You'll never be able to get back the credibility it lost because receipts are kept on what it really stood for, what it really glorified in. And I keep hoping that's what's going to happen. And I keep thinking, what's it going to take?